Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is D.H. Thorne here. This particular video is going to be a Demon in Review video concerning one of the shadow people covered in my second book, Shadownomicon, which you can purchase on Amazon. It's been out for a little bit over a year now. It's one of my favorite books to have written now. It's one of my better selling books. And I urge you guys to check it out if you're interested in the subject of shadow people, shadow work, and anything to do with the shadow current of magic. Now, I've already covered the Colossal Shadow, and this shadow was very important at the time. This was a time when, especially here in America, we were going through a lot of riots and things, and we still are to a much lesser extent. But it was very early on in that period, and I felt that a introduction to the Colossal Shadow would have been useful to people. This particular video is going to be about the Shadow Child, or the Shadow Kid, or however you want to say it. I sort of was never given a proper name for this being. It's more of a descriptive term. And this is a kind of shadow that there is very specific archetypes that shadow people will assume. For those of you who haven't read the book, I identified several that are very specific and some that are generic. So you have generic shadow people, which are less identifiable. They're not so easy to identify. Then there are some which you can easily identify. The most common and most popular is the Hat Man. By no means is he the most powerful, however. There are quite a few others, and sometimes they appear literally as their description. So in this particular case, the Shadow Child is a specific kind of shadow which will often appear diminutive and small. It will often appear like a child. Typically, sometimes this is the scariest possible thing, and I've even written in this book that the Shadow Child might be the most dangerous of all of the shadow people, because it is the most irrational. It is the least likely to have any sort of desire other than to see you suffer. It's very dangerous. So let me read a little bit from here. So the appearance: the Shadow Kid usually appears as a small child, male mostly, but female manifestations have been seen or imagined in the third eye, of course. The Shadow Child, the Shadow Kid, is also one of the few shadows I frequently see with a mouth, and it's not entirely or merely an artistic element in the rendering that I put in the book. I'll probably flash it on the screen if I haven't already. It has a wide, mocking, and mischievous mouth, and the mouth always seems to be laughing even if no sound comes out. Now, other archetypes that would be similar to this would be like that of an evil clown, an evil jester. The It from the Stephen King movies wouldn't be a far cry from the kind of mentality, the sadistic, destructive mentality that this being has. However, this is a childish version of that. Instead of being a mature psycho that's just trying to harm you, the Shadow Child represents an inner part of who we are that is often really, really devilish, devious, the part of you that wants to do the little pranks and things like that, that is based on a darker quality that you may not like to normally admit. See, we all have sort of, we'll say, morbid curiosities. We all have these kinds of desires to see things and do things that maybe we aren't very proud of. And the Shadow Child in particular is a manifestation of those childish interests. So for example, if you've ever wanted to just kind of like slap your friend on the back and just see how much you can make him yelp by scaring him, that's kind of a Shadow Child manifestation, if you will. That's related, although that's obviously a rather benign version. When the Shadow Child is involved, it's actually much bigger. It tends to be much more gruesome and sadistic. The Shadow Child is the epitome of the archetype of a being that would pull the little wings off of harmless insects just to watch them crawl around and suffer. Removing all their legs but one to see them crawling in a circle, and then cut their head off and see how far they can get. That kind of horrible kind of things. And maybe I shouldn't be too specific, because you guys might get an idea of how far my own mind can go. So the Shadow Child tends to be childish, obviously, but it's also very dangerous, because when it manifests in your world, when it manifests in your life, it has a tendency to cause all kinds of disruption and chaos and pain and suffering. It tends to be the one that's most likely to be malicious and try to scare you just for the fun and pleasure of scaring you, to cause you terror and alarm and concern and all kinds of things like that, trying to get you to be the most startled, perhaps, that kind of thing. So I'll read the correspondences that he's known for, and I pretty much named them all already. So childish narcissism, so it's all about me. Me, gimme, gimme, gimme. It's all like that kind of stuff. Morbid curiosity, as I said before, pulling the wings off of insects, that kind of thing. Invasively inquisitive. So if you've ever been not just nosy, there's another entity that can be like that. Not simply nosy, but like really just going too far, like just for the sake of just morbid curiosity, wanting to know too much about someone's sex life or emotional life or something like that. It enjoys torture. That's another thing that may be difficult for people to understand. You should imagine the most arrogant, the most obnoxious, bullying children that you can possibly imagine. Imagine one of them, like when you're picturing a kid being made fun of mercilessly for a birthmark or something. You have like dozens of children around them going, ha ha, nya, 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 nya. That's the kind of energy that this being has. It's also known for mischief, which I talked about before, the desire to play pranks and to scare you, that kind of thing. Humiliation is something that this is also associated with, related to that torture thing. And the bullying, it's also humiliation. The shadow child is often a representation of any humiliation that you experienced when you were very young, and we'll get back to that in a moment, hopefully I'll remember. Deformity, the shadow child is very interested in deformity. It's anything that is perhaps unusual. So if you know, like a child's innocent mind will often gravitate to people who are a little bit different, and because they're innocent, they don't know that it's maybe rude or impolite to point out differences in other people, certainly strangers. And this little shadow child is the part of you that looks at someone who's deformed and wants to make comments or can't stop staring, things like that. Willful disobedience is the last one. Willful disobedience is, being contrarian even though it doesn't serve you to be so. As much as I'm a Luciferian, I don't like the idea of simply being contrarian. Some people misinterpret Luciferianism as a kind of contrarianism. It is not. That is not what it's meant to be. It is not meant to be adversarial towards every last little thing, nor is Satan meant to be adversarial towards everything. Otherwise it would be adversarial to itself, and a kingdom divided will fall. That is something in the Bible that is said, right? Although I'm not working from the Bible, but you get my point. There's truth in everything. So let's talk about the humiliation. The shadow child is often born and often created in us. The seed of the shadow child is most often planted in us at a very young age. When we are children and we are picked on mercilessly by people, when we are scolded by our parents, when we have embarrassing moments like wetting the bed, whatever that may be for you, everybody's got them. There isn't a single person in the world that doesn't have those. And often a response that the child will have, the inner child, will, it will either become very passive or it'll become very aggressive. And this aggression can take the form of acting out, misbehavior, turning into a problem child. Now, very often, I'd say most often, people for the most part kind of get a handle on that early on. Their parents discipline them. They learn early on that they can't be like that. And so those urges move underground. They go into the abyss, those dark thoughts. For those of you who remember reading Become the Maelstrom, you'll recall the introduction section where I wrote about being humiliated and being in the bathroom and having a vision of Satan or some other being come to me and grant my request, so to speak. That was a moment of humiliation, of deep, dark, painful humiliation. And those of you who remember that section remember me talking about how I really wanted to get revenge on everyone. I wanted to become a werewolf. Well, that is very much the shadow child at play. That is that part of us. Now, most people, one way or another, either get rid of that or push it down deep so it's no longer something that is constantly on their mind, but it is there. It doesn't quite go away. Like all shadows technically are most powerful when they're invisible. When you're not looking for them, they just have an influence on your life that you're not aware of. That's when you're at your most vulnerable. So if you're like a really mature adult and you are very proud of how mature you are, how you don't get into things that maybe would get you into trouble, you follow the rules, all this kind of stuff, there is almost certainly an element of mischievousness that you are denying about yourself, instead of embracing that and going, yeah, you know what, I like to do this or that or whatever. This childish mischievousness tendency to want to see people humiliated. It's still there. This childish darkness is still there. And it tends to be one of the ones that for an adult can be the hardest to identify. So what I like to do when I am working either with that being or trying to identify that shadow in my own life is I find the petty little things that I do. Say I get into an argument on the internet, I get into an argument, and sometimes it will start off with noble intentions, but by the end of it I just want to mock the person relentlessly and humiliate them in front of all of their peers. And usually I do this under troll accounts, so you guys don't know who I am. But when this happens, instead of resorting to highbrow logic, reason, and conversation, I will immediately go into childish insults and things that, using my gifts of being able to read people, I'll dig deep and I'll find out what really bothers them, and I will begin to sort of pull on that scab. I'll find that wound and twist that knife until I embarrass them, humiliate them, hurt them, torture them. And this is something that I've had to identify and recognize that is at least part of the influence that doesn't cause me to do anything, but certainly inspires maybe not the best behavior on my part. So the shadow child is one that in this book I give you the strongest warning perhaps about, because it is the least likely to respond to logic or reason. Just like a little child telling it, well, you shouldn't do that, it's going to say why. You shouldn't torture the cat, you shouldn't harass your neighbors, you shouldn't pick on people, you shouldn't be a troll. It's going to say why. It feels good, it's fun. It doesn't want to listen to you. It wants to do what it wants to do. That's that element of mischievousness that it has. And when it's at play in your life, again, you probably won't even know it until it's too late. Now, when it manifests, if you do see this being, you are probably, you're either in grave danger or you're being given a great opportunity to identify that which you are doing. Now, I will say that the shadow child, in my experience, when I have glimpsed it in the environment, usually it's only a glimpse or it's in my third eye. When I do experience that being, it is most likely going to be found in the home of abuse. That is primarily where it's going to appear first. Either someone who is being abused or somewhere where abuse is going on. I mean child abuse specifically. A home where young children are being abused. The other time that this happens is when a child might be like a psychopath or something. They're just young and they are an actual problem child. And this entity has full sway over their behaviors. It is quite literally manifesting out of their own darkness and appearing for people because it's just that strong. I don't think it's proper to say that it's influencing the person that much. Probably the better way to put it would be that the person is is so exemplary of the being that it is manifesting. And it is also possible that the reason why I've only mainly seen male versions of it could be because it is, of course, a shadow reflection of my own inner shadow child. So that is something to be considerate of when you're doing work with the shadow current. Perhaps you've bought this book and you're working your way through it, and you're initiating with Legion, you're preparing to work with the other entities in there. The shadow child should probably be approached, if not formally, at least informally, as potentially a reflective shadow of your own inner self that has manifested in childlike form. One way to think of doing shadow work via the Shadownomicon is not that they are just entities, egregoric entities externalized from yourself, but it is similar to taking a car engine apart. You remove maybe the whole engine out of the chassis of the car and you take off the parts and you fix them and replace them. Well, this would be like removing the spark plugs or something. Working with the shadow child, it's like taking off a belt and replacing it. You're taking a piece out of the entirety of what you are, examining it closely, letting it be what it is without being ashamed of itself, not trying to hide it from you, and embracing it fully. Everything about you that's childish, that you think of as negative. Maybe you have like addictions to childish things. And maybe there's nothing wrong with that, and that's why you have a shadow child, because that shadow child is angry at you. Oh, I like to play video games, but that's for kids. I'm too much of an adult to do that anymore, but man, I really wish I would. The shadow child will manifest because you're denying a part of yourself. At least that's my theory, probably my experience as well. So, Demon in Review is very simple. I'm not going to give you any personal examples of this being. I'm giving you advice on this being. That's the best way I can do it. To give you personal examples of this being would be kind of silly because I kind of did, just indirectly. I didn't tell you like the times that I've seen it because there's not really too many times where I've had meaningful encounters with it. It's one of the ones that I kind of avoid. I don't try to manifest the shadow child. specifically very often, because it is very mischievous and dangerous. And when I have, it's been for a purpose, and I've gotten it over with. Now, as a being to curse people with, you know, the kinds of things you can use this being for, besides your own shadow work, you know, quite honestly, it's one of the best if you want to, like, kind of give people a lot of chaos in their life and suffering and torment of a whimsical, childish nature. So in other words, if you want to really screw somebody's life up, you know, Shadow Child can help. But if you just want to give them like a really bad luck kind of day where they're just miserable all day and everything's going wrong and they just can't seem to get anything go right and things of that nature, Shadow Child wouldn't hurt. But be aware that this being doesn't respond to commands or urges the same way that other beings will. You can't reason with this being. You have to treat it like a child. And one of the only methods that I found was to speak to it as an angry adult, not like nasty, but to use my daddy voice, so to speak, to talk to the child in a way that was, you know, authoritative as a father, maybe even lecture it a little bit, you know, threaten it with spankings, things like, I'm going to get you, kid. What are you No, you know, like, what are you doing? Stop it. Use the daddy voice, the one that scares kids, the mommy voice for that matter. Tends to work on it, but sometimes that can just make it go deeper. So you do have to be careful. So hopefully you guys found this useful. This wasn't my longest video on the subject, but lately I've been shooting these half-hour long videos, and I feel like it's important for me to get back to maybe a handful of shorter videos now and then so I can do more of them per week or have a little bit more time to do other things. For those of you who enjoy my content, if you want to support what I do, in the description of this video you will find links to my Amazon page where you can buy this book and 2 others which I have now in print. You can also go to my Etsy store at Mind the Shadows. In the description of this video, there's a little link to my Etsy, Mind the Shadows, where my wife is selling various things that support me and her. You can also go to my Patreon, and of course you can go to mindtheshadows.com where you can potentially book a ritual or a consultation or mentorship classes with me. So if you're interested in supporting me, those are probably the easiest ways, plus Teespring, where you can buy awesome, awesome tapestries like that one, t-shirts, all kinds of stuff that you know, supports me, and you get a thing in your hands that you can say, hey, I got a thing. To me, that's way more useful than just giving you guys, like, you know, hidden Patreon posts or something. You get something physical and tangible that matters. So hopefully you guys enjoy all this, and hopefully I'll see you guys again soon. Remember, we stream every Thursday night at 10 p.m., The Flesh Priest and I, and we have all different kinds of topics of conversation. We get a little silly, we get a little serious, and we take live callers. So if you're interested in joining us, join us for that live stream and call in on our Skype or join our Discord, and you guys can call in and be heard, and we can have a good conversation. All right, guys, until next time, mind the shadows.